On June 30th, the UK published a serious, thoughtfully constructed regulatory framework for crypto. On July 14th, the US and UK jointly committed to aligning their stablecoin regimes. And this month, Wall Street's backbone, the institution that processes virtually every security trade in America, began live trades of tokenized assets for the first time in its 50-year history.
This isn't a future story. All of this happened over the summer. Maybe everyone was trying to clear their desk before heading off on holiday.
And while all of that was unfolding, Spain won the World Cup. People tried to cover up 3 brands that weren't official sponsors. The internet made those brands more famous than the ones that paid $200 million for the privilege.
The regulation is building, the infrastructure is live, and the World Cup just reminded everyone why the participation layer matters.
Welcome to The Signal, Episode 3. I'm Maryam. We're recording this few days after Spain beat Argentina in extra time to win the 2026 World Cup, which means this is also mid-July. Holiday season is underway, and the honest truth about this time of the year is that the really big news tend to wait for September. Late June and July produced 3 of the most significant regulatory and infrastructure developments in this space that have been building for months and landed in quick succession. That is where we're spending most of this episode.
Tari joining from China, where I have been watching the World Cup at inconvenient hours and following the regulatory news during the day. Football does make an appearance in this episode too, so stick with us until the end. There's a reason we decided to bring the World Cup into what is otherwise a pretty serious conversation about financial infrastructure. But the main story this month is the regulatory framework being built around digital finance, and it's moving faster than most people realize.
Let's get into the numbers. June 30th looks like a one-day announcement, but it's not. The FCA has been consulting on this framework since at least 2020, formally across 4 discussion papers and 10 consultation papers since 2023. Some would say overdue. The UK tends to move slowly and then arrive with something remarkably precise. It takes its time, it listens carefully, and when it finally publishes, the result tends to hold. What landed on June 30th is the product of that approach, years of deliberate, methodical work. 4 policy statements covering stablecoin issuance, regulated crypto asset activities, admissions and disclosures, and prudential requirements. The rulebook comes into force on October 21st, 2027.
How significant is this for anyone outside the UK?
Very, very significant. The Financial Services and Markets Act that brought crypto assets into the FCA's regulatory remit passed Parliament in February 2026. June 30th is the finalization of the rules that give the act meaning. What firms can do, what they must hold, how they are supervised, what happens when things go wrong, and the authorization gateway opens September 30th, roughly 10 weeks from now. Firms applying before February 2027 get a savings provision that allows them to continue operating while their application is processed. The effective competitive deadline is not 2027, it's the next 6 months.
So it's fair to say this isn't a light touch regime.
Not at all. But what is distinctive is the process. Industry was not just consulted, it was heard. The capital requirement for stablecoin issuers was reduced from 2% to 1% following feedback. Local experts and even Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong had publicly warned in February that proposed holding caps could compromise London's competitiveness. Those caps were revised. That responsiveness is not accidental. It's deliberate signal that the UK is treating this as an economic opportunity, not just a compliance exercise.
Just over a week before we recorded this, the U.S. Department of the Treasury and HM Treasury jointly published a 10-point roadmap through the Transatlantic Task Force for Markets of the Future.
It was established in September 2025 by the U.S. Treasury Secretary and the UK Chancellor during President Trump's state visit to the UK. It is worth noting what this task force is and what is not. It's a bilateral coordination mechanism between the 2 governments. It's not a new law. It does not grant automatic market access. But what it does is a set of shared direction. And in financial regulation, shared direction between the US and the UK is not a small thing.
What does the roadmap actually commit to?
One-to-one reserve backing for stablecoins in both jurisdictions, reserves segregated from issuer funds, strong legal protections for holders, a private sector working group to test cross-border tokenization use cases, the SEC and FCA jointly exploring easier capital raising for firms operating across both markets, and importantly, a pathway for stablecoins regulated in one jurisdiction to reach customers in the other, subject to each country's domestic laws.
So, not mutual recognition yet, but the architecture for it?
Deliberately so. Each regulator wants to maintain domestic oversight. A stable coin authorized in one jurisdiction getting automatic market access in another means that jurisdiction's regulator has no direct say over products its citizens are using. Politically and structurally, that is unacceptable. So the framework is complementary, not unified. The practical implication for firms operating in both markets means satisfying both sets of requirements simultaneously. This is not a small compliance burden, but it is a clearer burden than operating in the gray zone that existed before.
From a China perspective, this connects back to the China February 6th regulatory opening, which we covered in episode 1, when Beijing created a legal pathway for offshore reward assets tokenization for the first time. Seeing the US and UK now moving in a similar direction adds momentum to a global digital finance infrastructure that's being built from multiple directions at once.
$114 trillion. That is the value of assets currently custodied by the Depository Trust Company, the organization that sits behind virtually every securities trade in the United States, settling equities, bonds, and ETFs on behalf of the entire American financial system. And this month, for the first time in its 50-year history, the DTCC began putting some of those assets onto a blockchain.
This is the pilot that had been talked about for months. It actually started.
Limited production trades went live in July this month while we're recording this, with nearly 40 financial firms participating. The roster includes JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, Vanguard, and the New York Stock Exchange itself. The first assets being tokenized include Microsoft stock, Circle shares, the SPY, and QQQ ETFs, and US Treasuries. Full commercial launch is planned for October.
And crucially, what are the legal protections on these tokenized assets?
Well, those are identical to conventional holdings. The DTCC has been explicit. Tokenized assets supported through DTC provide the same entitlement, investor protection, and ownership rights as assets held in traditional form. This is not a parallel system with different rules. It is the existing system running on new infrastructure. And DTCC has also confirmed integration with the Stellar blockchain, with tokenized assets expected on Stellar by mid-2027, which opens the door to a much broader range of settlement applications.
So the institution that settles American securities is now settling them on chain, live, not in a test environment.
Live, not in a test environment, but it is worth being precise about what that means. This is a soft launch, specific assets, specific participating firms, limited volumes. The October full commercial launch has not been publicly defined in terms of which additional assets will be included, how participant access will be widened, and what volumes need to reach for this to be considered a success. The Stellar blockchain integration, which is where the broader settlement ambition lives, is targeted for mid-2027. So the full picture of what DTCC on chain actually looks like is still coming into focus. What we have right now is one of the most credible proof of concept this space has ever produced. What we do not yet have is the finished infrastructure,
Which is why it's worth separating what's live today from what's still to come.
always the more useful one. And with an October full launch, hopefully by the time we record episode 4, we should know considerably more about whether the timeline is holding. I want to spend more time on the FCA regime because I think the international coverage has not fully captured what makes it distinctive. And as someone who has watched this space for 10 years and watched regulators get this wrong repeatedly, this one is worth examining carefully.
What have regulators typically got wrong?
Two failure modes. The first is regulatory overreach, attempting to apply frameworks designed for traditional finance directly onto crypto without understanding the technological distinctions. The result is compliance requirements that do not map onto how the technology actually works, which drives activity offshore rather than bringing it into a regulated perimeter. The EU saw some of this in early MiCA drafting. The second is the opposite. Regulatory avoidance, the hope that if you ignore it long enough, it will either go away or become someone else's problem. The US spent several years in this mode, which is why the Clarity Act is still working through the Senate.
And the UK avoided both?
The UK took a third path, activity-based regulation. Rather than asking, what is this asset, which gets into definitional quagmires around securities versus commodities that have paralyzed US regulators, it asks, what is this firm doing? Issuing a stablecoin, operating a trading platform, arranging deals, providing custody. Each activity has rules calibrated to the specific risks of that activity. The technology does not have to fit an existing legal category. The category is built around the activity.
Which is also how you end up with a regime that can accommodate innovation, because new products get evaluated on what they do, not what category they resemble.
Exactly. And the tiering on stablecoins is the clearest example. Most qualifying stablecoins are overseen by the FCA. If a stablecoin grows large enough that HM Treasury designates it systematic, meaning its failure would pose a risk to the UK financial stability, the Bank of England steps in as prudential regulator alongside the FCA. The obligations we face depend not just on what you issue, but on how important it becomes. This is elegant regulation. It does not prescribe what succeeds. It adjusts supervision to match the stake.
And for sterling-denominated stablecoins specifically?
The Bank of England's proposed code for systematic sterling stablecoins, still under consultation, expected to be finalized by the end of 2026. It requires backing held as a mix of unremunerated deposits at the bank and short-term UK government debt, very high-quality reserves, reliable redemption, and user protections if an issuer fails. That standard sets a floor for what a genuine GBP stablecoin should look like. It also makes GBP stablecoins the most credible digital sterling instruments in existence, which matters enormously for what comes next with the US-UK framework.
So a GBP stablecoin that meets Bank of England standards together with a USD stablecoin that meets the Genius Act standards could potentially become the settlement instruments on either side of a transatlantic trade?
That is the vision. Though it's worth asking whether demand for the sterling layer actually materializes at that scale. For most cross-border transactions, the natural answer is dollar. GBP stablecoin opportunity is real, but narrower. Domestic payments, UK securities settlements, sterling-denominated trade, the architecture being built is sound. Whether the demand follows at the scale implied is genuinely uncertain. This is not a reason to not build it. It's a reason to be precise about what it is for.
Is there anything about the FCA framework that you think is genuinely missing or unresolved?
Yes. And I think this is worth naming directly because it's relevant to what iRWA is trying to build. The regime, as written, is designed almost entirely around authorized commercial firms, trading platforms, stablecoin issuers, custodians, intermediaries. The activity-based framework works well for those entities, but it has very little to say about non-commercial structures. DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, they have no legal entity and no clear jurisdiction. Community treasuries, cooperative ownership models, artist collectives that want to tokenize their catalog, non-profit projects building participation infrastructure. Some of this could arguably be captured under arranging deals and qualifying crypto assets, and that argument will be made. But applying a commercial intermediary framework to a community cooperative or to a DAO is forfeit that creates compliance burdens the entities cannot carry and protections that do not map onto how they actually function. The FCA has flagged DeFi guidance as coming in late 2026, but DeFi guidance and community governance are not the same thing. There's a real gap between the commercial infrastructure the regime covers well and the participatory infrastructure that the next wave of this technology is actually being built for.
Which is also the gap iRWA is trying to fill.
Which is precisely the gap iRWA is trying to fill. And the honest answer is that no regulatory framework has addressed it yet. Not the FCA, not MICA, not the US Genius Act. The question of how you regulate tokenized participation in a community, a cause, a creative work, in a way that protects participants without requiring them to be accredited investors or authorized firms, is genuinely open. That is not a criticism of the FCA specifically. It's a frontier problem. But it is the problem that matters most for what this ecosystem is actually building toward.
At the start of this episode, I promised that if you stayed with us, you do understand why we were talking about football on a podcast about financial infrastructure. Here's why.
The 2026 World Cup cost official sponsors up to $200 million for exclusivity. FIFA covered logos, renamed stadiums, had players tape over their headphones, and the brands that got the most attention were the ones FIFA tried to silence. Levi's, Heinz, Bits. One TikTok of a covered tarp got 9 million views. Norwegian Air changed its logo to British Airways after losing a bet on the England match. Haaland was the last to leave the stadium. England and France played a 6-4 third-place thriller where a sellout crowd came simply for the joy of it.
None of these moments were bought. All of them generated more value than most of what was paid for.
And that is the point. Communities, fandoms, causes, they generate real economic value constantly. None of it flows back to the people who created it. That is not a new problem. It's just one we now have the technology to address.
And it is not just fan bases. Music royalties are being tokenized. Artists selling fractional ownership of future earnings directly to fans. Creative IP, community projects, participatory stakes in causes. The kinds of assets emerging go well beyond anything traditional finance has tried to capture.
But they also open a problem that the institutional RWA story does not have to solve in the same way. When BlackRock tokenizes a treasury bill, the holder is an accredited institution with verified identity. When an artist tokenizes their royalty stream and sells it to 10,000 fans, who verifies each of those holders? How portable is that verification across different platforms and jurisdictions? And critically, who owns that data? And what are the obligations attached to it?
This is the KYC question. Know your customer. It sounds like a compliance detail, but it is actually a design constraint that shapes what participation can look like at scale.
For a participation system intended to work for someone in Africa or rural parts elsewhere in the world without easy access to traditional financial identity infrastructure, the KYC layer is the hardest problem in the room. On-chain identity solutions exist, Polygon ID, Civic, others, but they are fragmented, not universally accepted, and the legal question of what identity verification actually satisfies regulatory requirements varies by jurisdiction. The infrastructure for democratized participation is being built. The identity layer that makes it trustworthy and inclusive is still catching up. You cannot take over a fan base. You can only build the framework that finally recognizes what it is worth and does it in a way that people can trust.
As we head into midsummer, August tends to be a little bit quieter, with big announcements often clustering around September. That doesn't mean the work stops. The ecosystems continues to grow, and we are hoping to be in a position to share some exciting partnership news soon. More to report in September. 3 takeaways this month. Summer edition, we are keeping it tight.
First, if you're building a crypto or digital asset business and the UK is a market you care about, the FCA authorization gateway opens September 30th. The window between now and February 2027 is the window that matters. Firms that engage now, that begin pre-application conversations with the FCA now, are positioning themselves for the competitive advantage that comes with being licensed under one of the most advanced crypto regulatory frameworks in the world. The 15 months until the regime comes into force is not a reason to wait. It's the runway you need to use.
Second, for anyone in payments, trade finance, or cross-border capital markets, the US-UK joint settlement is worth reading directly, not through summaries. The 10-point roadmap is not long. What it signals is that the transatlantic settlement layer for digital finance is being designed now by governments, not by industry. The firms and products that will benefit most from what that infrastructure enables are the ones building their compliance architecture toward it today.
Third, and I want to leave you with this one. The FIFA covered logo story is not just a marketing anecdote, it's a proof of concept. The emotional connection between communities and the things they care about is real. It's economically significant, and it's almost entirely uncaptured by the systems that currently handle value. The technology to change that now exists. The regulatory architecture to make it trustworthy is being built. The only remaining question is who builds the products that finally connect those two things.
Spain are world champions, but the moments everyone will remember from this World Cup are not the goals, they are the connections.
That is the signal for July 2026. September is when things typically accelerate again after the summer. And this year we will be heading into the FCA authorization window and a number of iRWA ecosystem developments. We will be reporting on. Send us your stories between now and then. We want to hear from the people building, not just the institutions announcing.
Exactly. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Find us on LinkedIn. We are iRWA. Enjoy the rest of summer.
See you in September.